Hit me. Welcome to the Stave Off Podcast, a part of the Senior Rehab Project. The Stave Off Podcast gives you the information you need to stave off illness and injuries, letting you live a happy life. And now your hosts, Nick and Christina.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Stave Off Podcast. My name is Nick Previtt. I'll be your co-host today. Joining me is Christina Nowak, the other co-host.
Hi everyone.
So today's topic is going to be about strength training as we age. We hear all the time, either my doctor told me I shouldn't strength train, I'm nervous about strength training, or I don't know where to start. So we're going to try and dive into each of those individually, but I'm going to let Christina talk a little bit more about strength training because that is basically what her PhD is on.
Just basically. So thanks, Nick, for kind of doing that introduction. Actually, over the last couple of years, I will say that the number of doctors who are saying don't strength train is, I hope, going down. Because we are starting to learn a ton more about just how important it is to strength train as we get older. And so before I get into some of the stuff about my PhD, we used to think that, this high intensity, so by high intensity, we're talking about how hard we think that the exercise that we're doing is. So a low intensity exercise would be like a movement, say bringing your elbow up to your shoulder, doing what we call a bicep curl. With no weight, you could probably do that, a couple hundred times? Yeah?
Probably cool.
Yeah. So that would be a lower intensity exercise. A higher intensity exercise was, say, putting a 20-pound weight into your hand. And then maybe you could do 3 or 5 of them because it's a pretty heavy weight for you.
Yeah. So intensity is all about duration as well. So the lower intensity it is, the longer you can generally do a given movement. Mm-hmm. And vice versa for a high intensity.
Yeah. So it's like running or doing a walk versus doing a full-out sprint, right? So the sprint would be the higher intensity one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So say I have an achy knee or I have arthritis in my knee. Why should I exercise?
So the saying that you'll hear me say over and over and over again is that our body needs to be strong enough to handle what we're asking it to do. And so a lot of times, especially as we get older, we do lose some of our strength every year. But what we're really starting to realize, and I'll go a little bit more into my PhD now that we're kind of talking about it, is that a lot of times the decreases in strength that we see as we get older are not just biology. They're because we stop moving. Like when we were kids, we would run around all the time. And Nick and I are in our 20s, and even us, like owning a business, like how much time do we spend sitting?
Yeah, good portion of it now.
Yeah, we spend way more time sitting. And if you were in a job for like a desk job where you're sitting 8-9 hours a day for, how long do we work for? 40 years?
Depends, yeah.
Forever? Then we kind of get used to not moving around as much. And so when we aren't putting demand on our body, when we're not challenging ourselves, then we lose strength faster than if we continue to challenge ourselves.
So what does strength training mean to you? First of all, I'm going to say what it means to me.
Okay.
But I want you to kind of tell me if I'm on the right track. So to me, strength training is my 60... I've got to get this right or else she'll kill me. I think my grandmother's 64. She's still pretty young. She's going through some illness stuff right now. But to me, strength training to her means being able to stand up off the couch.
Yep.
I think showing people that and telling people that is more difficult. But to me, that's what strength training means.
Yeah. So essentially what we're trying to do is be strong enough that what we have to do day in, day out is easy. Yeah. And so for kind of how we'll talk about strength training from an exercise perspective is that we're moving against gravity. So that can be getting up out of a couch and doing that 5 times, 10 times. It can be putting a barbell on our backs and, squatting a couple hundred pounds as Nick's dropping things. So for strength training can mean anything that is against gravity, which can be body weight. It can be a lot of extra pounds that we put on our bodies, but it's just whatever's challenging for you. So can I go back to my PhD a bit?
Yeah, hold on. So I think the don't squat principle that for a long time, the medical community kind of stuck to, right? It was almost the don't squat, it'll be bad for your knees. And I just want to make sure that's not ingrained in the generation we're talking to right now, because it was a big thing for a long time.
So are you talking about like arthritis, or are you talking about
No, for a long time there was the don't squat is bad for your knees.
Yeah. Well, the research in the last 10 or 15 years really hasn't said that was true. What we've kind of seen is that the stronger that your body is, and so we'll talk about your knees. So the stronger that your knees are, the more resilient you are, or the more that you're going to prevent injuries. So I kind of mentioned arthritis because I was kind of asking Nick a little bit about kind of where his thoughts were. There is some research to suggest that having bone-on-bone arthritis doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be in pain, which a lot of people think that you will.
So actually, now that I think about it, you just finished up a trial with your PhD in Mississauga. So Mississauga is one of our satellite sites where we run a boomers program there.
Yep.
But this is separate from that. So you just finished up 2 weeks ago, if that?
Yeah, we're just finishing up the assessments, and it's the second trial that I've done. So basically what I'm doing with my PhD is that I'm looking at people who feel that they are starting to slow down, or that things that used to be easy for them aren't as easy as they were before. And so some of that is that their bodies are weaker. And so what we're trying to do is identify these people who are starting to notice it, but it's not having this huge impact on their life. So, for example, when you walk up the stairs, do you feel confident doing it without the handrail? Could you get up out of a chair, no problem, even if it's a soft chair, without using the armrests on the couch?
Yeah, and I think that's a big deal that people don't think about as they age, because they just find it very natural to grab the handrail and always know that it's there.
Yeah, and some of it isn't strength too. Some of it is balance, but actually balance and strength are very closely related, and it's something that we really need to consider.
Yeah, so what would you say, I don't know if you can talk to your PhD results yet?
Yeah, not
really. A little bit? No, not really? Not really. I was hoping to get everyone some inside information.
Stay tuned.
So what we were talking about with the everyday activities that people are finding, and you know what, I don't even think it's that they're finding it more difficult. It's that they're almost stopping. Right? So something, not that saying something happens, but like I was talking to someone the other day, she noticed that going for a walk was harder and it took a little bit longer, so she stopped doing it. What would you say using strength training could do for them?
Yeah, so when we're talking about things that we're doing day to day, you want to talk about, how strong your body is and how able it is to do it. I guess an example would be, so I had somebody that I was working with for a couple of years, and one of the biggest things for her was that her job at home, well, one of them, she had many, was to do her laundry. do the laundry for the family. So she would have to take this laundry basket from the the laundry room in the apartment building that she was living in. Mm-hmm. And she had to go up flights of stairs, or she had to take the elevator, but she had to carry this laundry basket.
Yeah.
And how much would you say a laundry basket is? I don't even know.
15 pounds, maybe, if it's really full.
Let's say 15 pounds. We'll go with that. So 15 pounds. But she had such bad pain in her knees, and she just wasn't able to do it. And for her, that was devastating, because that is something that she's been doing for decades to help her family. So if you have the ability to lift 20 pounds, mm-hmm. and then you're asked to lift 15 pounds with the laundry, how hard do you think that would be?
Pretty hard.
Yeah, pretty hard. And so if we could get you strong enough that now you're able to lift 60 pounds or 70 pounds, how hard does that 15 pounds become?
Yeah, feels pretty easy now.
Yeah, it becomes way easier, because the amount of effort relative to the amount of effort that we can really, what's the word that I'm looking for? Really use. Yeah. Based on how strong we are, if we look at it in percentages, 15 pounds over 20 pounds is a lot more than 15 pounds over 70 pounds. Come on,
Christina, what's the actual number of that one?
Don't ask me to do that. And so it's really, really important. So, Nick, if you had somebody coming in to stave off and they'd never done strength training before, what are some of the things that you would get them to do?
So some of the things, this is a good start. So we always start with a good warm-up, but I don't really need to get into that, because that's...
What are like some of the fundamental strength movements that you would do for the lower body?
I think the first thing I always do and never do is a squat. Either it's usually to a box, especially with some of our older clients. I mean, we have people in here that are almost 80.
Mm-hmm. But what's a squat?
So squat is, I like to say, sitting to a chair.
Yeah.
You're starting from a standing position and you sit to a chair. So there's some fundamental things you have to look at when you want someone to squat, mm-hmm. especially as they age. So there's a few things that always happen almost right off the bat, and they don't even think about it. So one of them is that their knees collapse. So when I say collapse, is if you were staring someone straight in a front face, and they went to go lower themselves down, if their knees go in towards each other. So say if their knees touch as they go down. So that can cause a lot of knee pain over time. It's not going to be a sharp pain right away, but over time, that can cause a lot of knee pain, a lot of hip pain as well.
Mm-hmm. What is it a sign of?
Weak hips, really. It's weak hips.
It's weakness. So what happens is that our bodies have this amazing ability to compensate. Mm-hmm. And so we compensate for a really long time. And eventually our body says, to heck with you. I'm going to break down. Yeah. And so we get into these movement patterns that we need to use because we're just not strong enough. And then eventually those weaknesses start to really show up, and they show up as pain.
And a movement pattern is just a typical thing we've done as we're aging, or as we've done over time, that we've now ingrained in almost everyday life. Mm-hmm. Like if you grab something with your thumb over it or under it, that's a movement pattern. If you walk in a very straight line, or you almost stagger your feet, that's a movement pattern. Things like that are almost ingrained in you, and you don't think about it anymore. Now, so the next thing we look at for, say, a squat, without a weight, I look at if, as they lower themselves down, do they fall? Do they plop?
Are you a flopper? That's what you need to ask. Are you a flopper?
Do you plop down? So what that means is you'll see them, they'll be lowering themselves down, and they'll get to a certain height, and they'll just drop. It's because they usually know that a chair's there, or a couch, or something that's going to catch them. So what we really focus on is we'll count to 3 as we lower. And they'll go 1, 2, 3. And as they get to 3, they're supposed to just touch the bench or the box or whatever they're squatting to.
But why does it matter?
So that's control, right? So if you can't lower yourself all the way down, that means you're not strong enough.
Weakness! It's coming again!
We're going to have, I wish we had a video so we could do a big weakness. But yeah, that's weakness as we lower into that squat. So one of the things we start with is we start from a very high box. So the highest one we start with is about 30 inches, I think. Is that one, right? 30? Yeah. So we'll start at 30 inches, and then we'll flip the box on its side. We'll go down to 24, 20, and then eventually do a bench if we get there.
Yeah, and then sometimes people can do body weight squats on their own. There's going to be a lot of things with the squat too. Like, for example, if you've ever had a meniscus injury in your knee, then I would never have you squatting really low where your hip is kind of below your knee level. There's just certain things that, if you have muscle aches and pains or you have things going on, that consulting with a physio or making sure that whomever you're working with, if it's a personal trainer or kin, is aware of so that they can modify the program for you. I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Finding someone finding someone you trust.
Yeah, for sure. And so, okay, so let's keep going with the squat. So if we're trying to learn how to get up from a chair, if you feel like you're having trouble with that, especially if it's not a hard service, right? I think that the biggest thing that we see with a lot, is the couches. And trust me, there are some couches where I'm like, what is this demon? It eats and it's hard to get out of them. So it does take a little bit more strength. So why then, if we're doing something to a higher box, does it transfer?
It's all about the range of motion you can control yourself in right now. So the range of motion means how far you can lower yourself, how far you can push your knees forward, how far you can bend at your hips, things like that. So that range of motion is just how far your knees bend, basically. So the reason we'll start at a higher box is because we want you to get the prerequisite strength there before we lower you. And that's more for your safety than anything. Because there's no point in getting you to squat to a 20-inch bench when you kind of fall at the 24-inch.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what about that whole don't let your knees come over your toes?
So that is a very old verbiage. So you want to be able to see your toes because you want to be able to think your knees are outside of your feet. That meaning your knees aren't collapsing in, and like we were talking before, that's weakness coming through the hips. So for a long time, we were told, don't push your knees over your toes because that gives you arthritis in your knees. It gives you knee pain. That's a lot of what your PhD is about. So,
and it's not true.
It's as easy as that.
Well, okay. So here's what happens when we squat. A lot of times, if I ask a person in my physio clinic to squat, they shoot their knees forward. What they don't do is put their hips back. When you think about when you're getting up from a chair, your butt goes back and then you get up. I don't shoot my knees forward to go into a chair. But when I ask a person to squat, that's what they do. And by shooting your knees forward without also pushing your hips back, then that's where some of the concerns come, and that's where some of the pain at the front of the knee can come as well.
Yep. We see a lot of people too, as soon as they get to 50, I'd say maybe closer to 60, that people tell them you shouldn't do squats or deadlifts, you're going to hurt yourself.
Hogwash.
So that's how Christina explained it. But
I'm very articulate.
It's true. We see I don't want to say we're trying to baby our older generation, but why wouldn't the same principle of strength training work when you're 40 versus when you're 60?
Yeah. So I'm going to go a little bit nerdy on you. There was a study that was done in 1998. So it was a small group. I think it was like 15 or 16 people. And they were men who were in their 90s who were in a nursing home or a long-term care home. So they were in an institution because of their medical needs. And they said, you know what? I'm going to put you on an 8-week strength training program. Mm-hmm. So these are people that most people would believe were, kind of there for the long haul. They probably wouldn't be able to improve. There's no way. They put them into an 8-week strength training program, and the average increase in muscle size was like 175%. Like just crazy amounts of improvement that got made. And so it just really goes to show you that you can improve no matter what your age and what your current status is. Obviously, as we get older, we're not going to be lifting the same amount that like in our 60s that we were in our 20s. So it's a little bit relative from that perspective. But I have people who are in their 70s right now who continue to do new personal records and who are doing so much better week after week because they're just making general progress and they're improving. Mm-hmm. They're progressing. They're really challenging themselves.
I'm trying to think of specific people because how old is, I don't know if we can say his name on the podcast. I don't feel like I should.
One of our gentlemen is like 73 years old.
Yeah.
And he was a teacher and he
was a gym teacher and as well as a math teacher, but he did predominantly gym for a long time. Very active. He coached high school basketball. He was a runner up until he was 70. And he recently just stopped. And so he was coming to us. He's feeling a lot better. And he went for a run the other day.
Yeah.
His first time in a long time.
And so that's really, we're starting to see a lot of these anecdotal stories of, people who, what was that Reebok commercial with the sister who was doing the triathlons and things like that? Like she was in her 80s, like 84 or 85, and she was doing triathlons. Mm-hmm. And I think even Ironman triathlons, like just crazy. Today so this is going to be a couple of weeks ago by the time this goes live, but on our Stave Off Facebook page, I just posted a video of a gentleman who turned 90 years old and he was able to lift 100-pound weight up off the floor 5 times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So would you I know there's a big gray area in the physio community right now about using strength training as a rehab. Some are all for it. Some would rather do other things, to put it mildly. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that?
Of course, you try and get me to badmouth people. I'm just kidding. So strength training definitely is rehabilitation. I have had, so this is where I go into another anecdotal story. I had a gentleman who was in his 40s, late 30s, 40s.
I know what you're talking about. Right. Oh, yeah. Late 30s, I think. Maybe early 40s.
Yeah, anyways. Sorry, I totally said your name on the podcast. I'm hoping you're not listening.
Today. He'll be fine.
Yeah, so he had back pain for a really long time. He had gone to physio before. He thought that it wasn't going to work, which was a little intimidating, I must admit. And he thought it wasn't going to work. And so I said, he's done all of the other stuff. He's done the soft tissue stuff. He's done some of the electrical stims and things like that. I'm going to just try and strengthen up his back. And so I used a lot of the same strength principles that I would use with some of my varsity athletes. And we put him on a progressive strength training program. So week after week, we progressed it. And he noticed that he would stop taking medications as much, that his body was getting stronger, that he wasn't thinking about the fact that he had back pain. And eventually, I think I just saw a video of him lifting 275 pounds off the floor, which is incredible.
He started with a bar off a height.
Yeah, so we started at, I think I didn't start him at 45 pounds. I started him at 35 pounds.
Yeah.
So we went from 35 pounds, about 16 inches off the floor, to being able to lift 275 pounds off the ground. and he's never been stronger, and his back doesn't hurt anymore. And it's even positively affected his marriage because he's not in pain anymore. Like, that's huge.
And now he's a big suck.
Yeah, all big softy.
All right, so you've sold me. Where and how do I start safely?
That is a big, it depends.
Yep.
So every person is going to have their own background story. They used to think that before you get started on an exercise program that you should see your doctor if you have any health concerns, whether if there's like a history of high blood pressure or, there's just different risks to your heart. Now, unless there's a pretty significant medical history going on, the benefits of starting a strength training program are going to seriously outweigh the potential costs. I would start looking around for either a program that the person that you're getting started with, consult with a physio if you have any aches and pains about, what you should avoid, what you like. When I'm talking with any of my clients, I kind of talk about it like a traffic light. So I'm trying to figure out what your red lights are, your yellow lights are, and what your green lights are. Yeah, what your red lights are what you should avoid all the time. So if I have somebody, for example, who has severe arthritis in one of their knees, I'm not going to get them to squat with this full deep knee bend because it's going to flare up their knees. Like, that's not safe, and that's not what I want them to do because I don't want them to be in pain after. So your red lights, I want to know your yellow lights. So things that would be good for you to do, but you need to be careful and proceed with caution. Mm-hmm. And then what your green lights are. So what are your things that you can do no problem that aren't going to cause you any pain? So if someone has a history of an ankle injury, most of the upper body stuff will probably be okay. So that'll be all big green lights. And so finding something that you can trust, or even getting started in low intensity stuff, there's a ton of I don't want to say a ton of resources on the internet, but there is a ton that you can do to really learn about proper movement and proper mechanics and all that kind of stuff.
I also think you really need to find someone who's worked with this population before, because there's definitely some things that are going to come up that they are not used to. I know even when I started working with this population, this generation, this clients, there was things where I looked at that and said, that's terrifying to me. We've worked with people who've had stroke, who have MS, who have lung conditions, who have COPD. Those things are scary when have never been exposed to them.
Yeah, and so I feel a little bit more comfortable with that. And so, having a very candid conversation with anyone that you're looking to work with is going to be extremely valuable, because I think that people in general are pretty aware of what they're comfortable with and what they're not. And there's times where, Nick's like, I can definitely work with you. Like, I think that we'll have a good relationship. And there's times where we say, I think it's like for you to refer to someone else, or, have physio look at it first. And then once it's cleared, come through, or something like that. There's just always look for the person, and don't be afraid to have a conversation with them and explain some of the aspects of your medical history, if there is anything, even if it's just, muscle aches and pains, and talk about it from there.
I do know there's definitely people who are doing a great job in this field, in the local. I don't know a ton about outside of really the GTA or Ontario as a whole. I know Tori at Element is doing fantastic things with the Boomers program. Yeah,
so just look around at your local environment. So Nick's giving examples kind of around where we live, but there are a ton of people throughout the world that have connected with us actually through the podcast and through our business, who are doing incredible things, and you just kind of have to look for them.
I can't believe I'm blanking on her name. Up in Collingwood.
Oh, Bonnie.
Bonnie's doing great things up there. It's actually one of our satellite sites as well for the trial.
Yeah, absolutely. But we know like Taylor Harrison in Australia is doing an amazing thing with active seniors. And obviously Dustin with some of his home health PT. And
he's okay.
He's all right. We like him a little bit. Oh, so we have a ton of examples. So reach out to us if you want, because we can kind of maybe lead you in the right direction.
Yeah, if you're looking for some information in your area, we may be able to help. We might not, but we'll definitely look in and try and see.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is a good primer. Strength training will definitely come up a lot when we're talking about different conditions and, what the guidelines are, what's safe, what's not safe. In the show notes for our episode, I will put the guidelines for older adults. So technically, an older adult is anyone over the age of 65. For me, I don't feel like 65 is really old, but that's a whole other discussion. So we'll put a couple of links to resources for you to get a little bit of an idea about different strength training exercises, as well as some of the guidelines, because right now the guideline is 2 times a week for the strength training.
Yep.
The strength training. And it's major muscle groups, and you want to do 3 sets. And I believe it's high intensity, meaning, that it's a big challenge. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay, so strength training, bad for older adults, thoroughly debunked.
Debunked. It is a myth. It is good for you.
I wish I had a little stamp, like a debunked stamp.
Like that Discovery Channel show.
Yeah.
Mythbusters.
There you go. Mythbusters.
All right, so if you have not done a strength training program, go do it now. Or if you're driving, when it is safe to do so, look for a strength training program in your area. You will be happy that you did.
All right, thanks everyone so much for listening. If you could subscribe and give us a 4-star or 5-star review, whatever.
5-star.
5-star.
We don't want a 4-star. We want
the best star review that is there. that would help us out so much,
so that we can get on to the new and noteworthy on iTunes. And
thank you so much.
We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye. That was good.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Stave Off podcast. Go to staveoff.ca to check out the show notes and more helpful content and how you can lead a long and happy life.